Hey everyone, Travis here at Riot headquarters to talk to someone about a very new project here at Riot. I'm joined right now by Mel Li, who is the narrative lead on a new game, which is Legends of Runeterra. Do you want to talk about what this game is?
Yeah, so Legends of Runeterra is a TCG, or a card game, and it's going to take players kind of like off the Rift, off Summoner's Rift, where the place that they've grown to know and love, and into the world of Runeterra. So that's a place where we've kind of like seen little glimpses of it through champions, through like color stories, through maybe some art here and there. But now we're really going to get to meet both like the champions, but also like who's the champion's family, like what's the world of Runeterra like, what are the creatures around here like, what does the world even look like? So yeah, that's where our game's headed.
And you said trading card game. We should say that this is a digital game. It's not just a physical one.
Yes.
So this will be a brand new game, and I was just hearing this is like a separate entity. It's not part of the League of Legends client, or it's like its own game, very different than like Teamfight Tactics, for instance.
Yeah. So this is going to be its own standalone game. We have sort of like our own economy as well. Yeah, brand new game.
So a very exciting time, I'm sure, for you guys to be releasing all this and announcing it. Can you explain to me a little bit about how the game works, maybe even in comparison to some of the other card games that are out there? Because a lot of people will think of like Hearthstone or Magic or these other ones that people are familiar with. How similar and how different is this game?
Yeah, that's a great question. So really with Legends of Runeterra, what we wanted to do is make like a strategy card game that players really feel a lot of agency over. So if we were like looking at other games, Hearthstone, for example, features a lot of RNG in their game. That's something that can make a really fun experience for them. But our game is for players who are like, I really want to be in control of my strategy. I want a lot of strategies to choose from. I want like a really diverse meta. Other games are kind of like Magic the Gathering, so that's a game that's been around for, gosh, like 20 plus years now. So it's a game with a lot of complexity, and so what we were trying to do is provide a game that's got that same kind of like in-depth strategy, but something that's a bit more approachable, something that's like made from the ground up for digital.
And so I'm going to ask a couple questions just to start here, because I'm sure some people are watching this and they maybe started the video and they're like, I don't know if I want to play a card game. Maybe they've played Hearthstone before. So a couple of questions. How accessible is this game going to be for people who have never played a card game before, or just generally don't enjoy playing the ones that they've tried in the past?
No, that's a great question. So I'm a person who has played card games pretty much all my life. There's definitely been times in my life where I've kind of like gone back and forth between playing them or not playing them. And for me, that's depended a lot on like basically like, can I afford the current meta? And this has been like a big question for card games, especially for a long time. And some people view them as like cash grabs, or like something that you really have to dedicate. Like card games take up so much mental space. Like you kind of have to know what the function of every card is, and kind of like what the relations to each of those cards are. And so like in addition to that mental space, a lot of card games are like, and on top of that, we want you to spend a lot of resources in on getting like the deck that you actually want to play. So we were like, as people who love card games, and for me personally as a person who has grown up with and loved card games, what if we could take the Riot model of like providing this really high quality product, like the League of Legends that we all know and love, and what if we could apply that model to card games? That would be incredible. And so that's really like the mission that we're after.
So it sounds like, I know you didn't want to say it, but card games are really expensive. I've played a ton of WoW TCG whenever I was in college, and I remember financial aid would hit, and it's like, great, now I can go drop 100 on a case. It sounds like that's something you guys are trying to avoid here, where it feels like you have to spend so much money to be able to make all the decks that you want.
No, totally, yeah. I had pretty much that exact same experience. I remember being in college with my friends, and we would like pool our money together, hang out in like one of the classrooms and just like draft together. And it was a whole lot of fun, but like it got to the point where it's like, okay, like we can only do this like so often, and it's a great experience. It's like how I met a bunch of my friends. It's an awesome community, but yeah, it's just like sometimes just like practically hard to keep up with.
So then what does that actually mean for the model? of the game? Because people will hear you say like, okay, we don't want people to have to drop a ton of money in order to play in whatever the meta is, but how do you actually unlock the cards? How do you actually get to play the game?
Yeah, so like similar to League, where you're like going through games and you're like acquiring blue essence as you go along, and you're like, oh, okay, cool, like I can get blue essence just by playing the game, and then I can get new champions, and I can, you know, like kind of like adjust my path as I want to, and kind of like make the way that I play kind of like expressive of what I want to do in the game, and kind of like explore through the game at the same time. So we were taking a really similar tack in our game, and so based on how much you play, you can kind of like pick which cards you want to unlock, and then kind of start building your decks in that same way that in the League you'd be building up like your roster of champions, for example.
So just by playing, you'll be able to unlock the cards themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And we're not kind of like putting them behind like, you know, like walls of dust or like just actual dollars that you have to put in. These are like player hours that that you can like spend enjoying the game as you earn your cards.
How random are the card unlocks? Because that's also another thing, even with digital card games, where if you're spending in-game resources or real-life money to get it, you kind of are opening random packs. So like how random is the unlock mechanic?
Yeah, so we don't have random packs in our game. You are allowed to purchase wild cards that help you get cards of different rarities. So like, you know, you get a rare wild card, like great, you can unlock a rare. But we're not kind of like in that same situation where you're just buying random packs and hoping to crack something that's awesome. Because like, I think we've all been there in that situation where like if I'm at a sealed draft and the person across from me like happens to crack some like mythic, I'm like, oh great, you know, like I see where this is headed. And so like there's a lot of that like feel bad. And it's again coming back to that like, you know, RNG can be exciting, but it can also be like a giant downer when you're really into like the strategic play aspect.
Yeah. The other thing I recall from the physical card games, but even in digital ones as well, is that you just oftentimes end up with a lot of cards that are not valuable. And you know, I remember having these large boxes of cards, and like maybe I'd collect like 4 of whatever card in the hopes that at some point in time in some meta it was going to be valuable. Maybe it never would. So will players experience similar things to that, where like maybe they're collecting cards that might not be useful for a long time or ever?
So like when we're building our meta, we try to make sure that like there's a spot for even like common cards. And there's a lot of cards that are like, you know, like they just need to find their place in the right deck oftentimes. And so we try to make sure that like we're not, you know, we're not making junk commons basically. The other thing that we try to do is like we're trying to make sure that you're getting overall like resources that can apply to getting whatever card you want. So like if you do have a bunch of commons, they're not just going to be like, okay, great, I have like all this junk and I can't do anything with it. It's going to go more towards like, hey, I want to get this like, earn my way to this like cool rare or something like that.
Kind of getting back to that new player experience, how complicated is this game? If I'm sitting down and playing it for the first time, which hopefully will happen soon, I have to, you know, figure out how to play the game, and card games can be quite complex, right, with all the different resources and that type of stuff. So how approachable is the game, you think?
That's an interesting question. Like, I think it'll kind of depend on your familiarity with League, maybe your familiarity with card games. We do have a tutorial section that's in the beginning of the game that's trying to help players through that like learning process. I think that like if you play League, hopefully there's a lot of like ins where you're like, oh, okay, like I get it. You know, like Garen's spinning to win, and that's like his judgment ability. Cool, that makes a lot of sense. Or you know, like Darius is Noxian Guillotine. You know, that's going to like be able to be like a cool finisher. So there's that inroad, like if you're a League player. If you're a player who doesn't know much about TCGs, I think it's still like a great game to like get started in it. Again, like I said, like this was a game that was made from the ground up to be a digital TCG. So in that way, I think like we've kind of like streamlined a lot of stuff that you might find in like older card games and tried to make them like more accessible for this kind of crowd.
Yeah. You have already mentioned a couple champions, so maybe it's a good time to dive in. Like if I'm a League of Legends player and I'm excited about another League of Legends world game, how do these champions manifest in the game? Am I picking a champion, sort of like in Hearthstone where I'm picking a hero? How does all that work out?
Yeah, so in Legends of Runeterra, you're actually going to be able to make a deck. You can pick up to 6 champions to put in your deck. your deck will have 2 regions that you choose from. So examples of regions are things like Noxus and Demacia are the best known. There's Piltover Zon, there's Shadow Isles. What we're trying to do in this, in our content, is to provide you that same kind of variety that League has, because really I think that's one of the coolest parts of League as a whole is man, there's 140 champions. You can play anything from Undead Warrior till there's not even one, but there's 2 tree people. There's a magic cat. We're trying to encompass a lot of this awesome League variety in our content and really give you a lot of different ways to play.
So you put champions into the deck. What else goes into the deck?
Yeah, so apart from champions, they're what we call followers. So they're just basically they're not a champion, but even though they're called followers, these are really exciting cards and some really exciting characters also that I think we've mentioned in the past as characters who might be involved with the champions that we know and love, but we're actually kind of bringing them to life, giving them gameplay. Characters if you read League comics, characters like Tiana Crownguard, who's Lux and Garen's aunt. She's kind of this martial leader of Demacia. There's Senna, who actually is now a champion. There's Yasuo's brother Yone, so a bunch of really cool characters that we were excited to take from some of the stories of these champions and actually show you what they would be like in a game. Nice.
So really the followers are a way to flesh out the world in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're in the Freljord, it's what kind of monsters am I going to see? What kind of other people just live in the world as civilians.
Okay, so we got champions, we got followers. What other types of cards are there?
It's really mostly champions, followers, and then spells.
Okay.
And there's all different kinds of spells that you can have. There's burst spells, fast spells, and slow spells. All of those kind of operate slightly differently, and some spells are kind of more flashy than others. So there's spell cards. I think that's the main classifications.
Yeah. And then are there resources, sort of like lands, or how does that work?
Yeah, we don't have lands in our game. We have mana crystals. So just like how in games like Hearthstone, you kind of build up incrementally, we have the mana system. But in addition to the mana, you also have spell mana, which is actually a really cool kind of catch-up mechanic. If you've ever played a card game and you're you've drawn your hand and you're oh man, this is not going to go well. And sometimes if you just draw a bad hand, you're all right, great. I'm screwed for the rest of the game. I see where this is headed. I'm pretty much out. Right,
because maybe you've got a bunch of high-cost cards and you can't spend them for a while.
Yeah, exactly. So what our game does is we say all right, if you haven't spent the last 3 mana of your previous turn, that's going to get banked and it becomes spell mana. So those spells that I told you about, they actually have really cool and some really dramatic, powerful effects. So it's a way that you can kind of get yourself back into the game and adds a lot to the strategy of our game.
Gotcha. And then so card games oftentimes have very complicated phases, right? And to the extent that I never even bothered to learn the names of the phases, even though there's always a document somewhere that explains it. It's just eventually you just kind of figure out when stuff can go. How complicated is that aspect of Legends of Runeterra?
Yeah, so there's some really cool things about those phases of other card games that kind of allow you to do actions throughout the turn that are varied and different and kind of add a lot of spice to the game. And what we wanted to do is take some of that idea of the phases of a turn, but make that more approachable and make it, keep this kind of we call it a conversational aspect. So in games like Magic, you have this cool back and forth because there's this thing called the priority system where players can keep taking actions kind of whenever they need to.
Yeah, you can kind of chain all these things back and forth.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And it's this cool flexible system where we're oh, that's pretty awesome. But yeah, the phases are really hard to remember. So the way that we approach it is kind of a back and forth action. So we never really need to tell you hey, you can only do this thing at this certain time. You can actually attack or cast spells in a lot of different parts of your turn, and we don't really need to define specific turn phases for you.
Yeah. Okay, so it is a lot of back and forth. There's less of a phase situation.
Yeah.
So actually that kind of lends me to the next question, which is it sounds like it's pretty approachable, and it seems like you guys are taking a lot of the complication away from some of the other stuff. The downside of that potentially would be, for people who have played card games for a long time, they're like, okay, is this too easy? Is there enough depth here for me to have fun? I don't know how much you can speak to the amount of depth that's in the game, but I'm kind of curious, like, how far down you think it goes.
No, yeah, I think that our game is definitely not lacking in depth. So that conversational aspect is actually something that I think adds a lot on top of. So there's systems like Hearthstone where there are very defined actions that people need to take. So for example, kind of like traps are really the only kind of spells that don't sort of just happen and then resolve.
Yeah.
So in our game, you have kind of a window to respond to certain types of spells. And so again, we're trying to build in this really dramatic back and forth. And so that's really where a lot of the skill and strategy comes from. It's from seeing what your opponent does and being able to take an action based off of that, because that just adds a lot in between.
Does that back and forth go really rapid? Because actually, I mean, in most card games, you have a fairly long time to sort of methodically think about what your next step is. I don't know how quick you guys have made this.
Yeah, so there's timers for each action. So you have a certain set amount of time for each of those actions. We do want it to feel like a conversation. So like any good conversation, you don't want somebody to hang and pause for a really long time and then kind of start through whatever they're saying. So we try to limit the amount of time people take to do each action. So it ends up being fairly quick back and forth, because you're not planning for 6 actions in a row. The excitement of it is actually the game has changed each action that I take, because I can actually see the person reacting to me. So that's the really exciting part of the game.
Yeah. And then, so you have that kind of back and forth. I'm very curious how the deck building side of it goes. How many cards can you have in a deck, and how complicated is it to make these? Because that's actually this whole before the game even begins in card games, you've already made a bunch of decisions on how that game is going to go. So I'm kind of curious what the deck building aspect is like.
Yeah. So decks are 30 cards, and you can have up to 6 champions in your deck. And there are 2 regions max that you can have in your deck. So if you want, you can play Mono Noxus. You can also play Noxus Ionia if you want to.
Regions are like colors, kind of?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, you can think of them that way.
Gotcha. And so you're kind of picking what the region makeup of your deck is going to look like.
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right, so I do want to ask, there's an interesting question, and it sounds like you said you've played card games for a long time. I think for some people, there's this expectation okay, well, the card game wave hit a while ago in the gaming space, and we saw Hearthstone come out and other games come out. Is it too late to come out with a card game? Do you feel as though Legends of Runeterra can still like really hit hard and get a lot of people excited about a card game?
I mean, there's going to be certain genres of games that just like go on for like into perpetuity. I mean, like people are still making RTSs, even though you might say like StarCraft was like forever ago, but like RTS is just like an awesome genre. So like if somebody comes up with a cool new RTS game, I'm like, yeah, like let me go play that. So I think like similarly, like I don't think like genres as a whole need to rise and fall. I think it's like if people find an awesome product, then I think they'll be like, yeah, that's really fun. I want to go play it. So yeah, like my hope is that like people give it a shot and see if they like it, and think whatever they need to about the genre. But like ultimately, we just want you to feel like it's fun.
Yeah. So how's everything rolling out over the next, I guess, couple months or year? How's this going to look?
Yeah, so we're going to start with our first preview patch coming up. That's going to be for about 5 days. In November, you get to look forward to getting to see our Expeditions patch. And then sometime next year, we're going to actually launch the thing sort of like around the world.
Yeah. Maybe this is a good time to ask what are Expeditions? Because apparently that's going to be a patch coming up soon. I have to learn about that.
Yeah. If you've ever played a lot of other card games before, sometimes it's called Draft, sometimes it's called Limited. But what I really like about it is, again, like what we were talking about, kind of like trying to level the playing field with card games can be kind of an issue because you're like worried about like, oh, my opponent's outspending me. So the cool thing about Expeditions is you go into it and you don't even have to own any of the cards in order to just like see what's exciting and build a deck out of cards that you might not own. You might not ever have seen any that you might not have seen before, and get to build a deck out of that and play that.
Okay, so this is kind of like the draft mode, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. All right, and then I think, as we've just talked about the product a ton, I'd love to learn a little bit about how this came to fruition. So, I mean, what does the team look like? Is this a lot of like the League of Legends folks that have come over to work on this, or I guess kind of who are the people that have been working on this?
Yeah, so that's we're like a really interesting mix of folks. We definitely have some like old school hardcore leaguers. One of our concept artists, for example, Edmundo Sanchez, I think is one of the like oldest writers. I mean, not in terms of age, but has been at Riot pretty much longer than any other employee at the company. We've also got Magnus Lehman and Oliver Chipping, who are their claim to fame is that they invented Poros, which is, I think, a pretty excellent achievement. Magnus was one of the artists who worked on Lux back in the day. So yeah, some like really distinguished League folks coming in.
This is very fun for me, by the way, because there are people that I knew back in the day on the League side, and then they just disappeared into a dark room somewhere for all these years. And I was like, I don't even know where these people went now. So it's fun to hear some of them are finally getting to come back out with the launch of this product.
Yeah, and it's exciting to have like all of these folks' knowledge about like just fundamental knowledge of like how is League made and like what are the creative principles of the world and stuff like that. Yeah. We've got people who have come in from other projects, people who have worked on like a bunch of different games. So it's kind of bringing a lot of folks together.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, how much card game experience is there on the team? Because I assume that with something like this, you would probably want to have a lot of people who have experience in the card game genre.
Yeah, we've got a number of those folks, particularly in, so myself, I'm from Wizards of the Coast before. We have other card designers who are from Hearthstone, other Magic designers. We have artists who have worked with other card games before as well. Yeah.
And then I just wanted to ask you a little bit on the creative side of this, because a lot of people think card games, and I think until somebody really starts to play them, they don't really realize the amount of like art and kind of world building that goes into a card game, because they think, okay, well, this isn't like an MMO, like we don't have to build out this vast world, but you're a narrative lead on this thing. So what kind of involvement does that have? I mean, what kind of creative work goes into a product like this?
Yeah, it's actually really funny because I feel like a lot of different card game products are kind of like working off a lot of existing material. So like, like Hearthstone has this incredible vast amount of lore from World of Warcraft. Magic's been around for 25 years, and so they've got a ton of stories and events that have been associated with the product. And with League, we're kind of coming into it knowing a lot about these individual characters and a lot of kind of like pieces of the world. So it's been my job to kind of like figure out like how do all these pieces kind of like fit together, and how do these stories that we've been telling about these characters kind of like manifest themselves both in like, like how does Noxus play, and does that feel like what players might know about Noxus and that sort of thing. So yeah, like we wanted to make sure that we were respecting the IP in a lot of that sense. So like respecting like the identities of the champion, things that people love about them. So we worked with like with Insights, we've worked with like other narrative folks, we've worked with obviously other folks from League who are sort of like craft leads, all those kinds of people to try to like bring the world of Runeterra to life. So like even just like starting out on this project, one of the first things that we were thinking about is like how are we actually telling these like stories, and how are we talking about these characters, and how might that actually relate to the game itself? So like I said before, like the game is this very conversational game that encourages players to like look closer and like to appreciate the strategic depth that's in some of the combinations of cards. So we really wanted to reflect that, like both in like the stories that we're showing through art, and like kind of like telling in like voiceover and things like that. We're really lucky to get to work with Six More Vodka. They're the folks who do our art, and they've been around for a long time doing splashes for League, and they're incredible. So when we were going through this content, we were working with them to figure out like who are the characters in this world, and so like a lot of my work was with concept artists or with SMV themselves, and saying like, all right, like what do these characters look like? Where are they? And how does that actually relate to the gameplay that we're doing? What kind of like identities are we giving to these regions, and like does that make sense? And does that make sense with the champion that they're assigned to, and things like that? So similar to that feeling of like look closer, we have a lot of art pieces that we try to make like kind of work together. So there's a ton of like visual Easter eggs. So for example, we have these cards that are Kato and Shiraza are these two kind of like battle gladiators in Noxus, but they're also just like this awesome combo of cards to play together. And so if you look at their art, you can see that one of them is kind of like tossing the other like through the air. And so it's kind of like there to kind of like express what their mechanic is and to show that like these two characters are connected in the world. And like similarly, like when we write voiceover, we're not thinking about like people already know like what Garen as a champion is like, and like the stuff that he'd say and like the things that he'd do. But like the approach to it that we wanted to take was like, you know, like what is this character like at a party? So like, you know, like it's this crazy party where like, you know, your family's there. Maybe like, you know, he's interested in Kat, and Kat's there, Katarina. You know, like how is he different to all these different people? You know, he's like talking to soldiers, he's talking to his aunt, he's talking to his sister, he's talking to his love interest. So that was a lot of what we were trying to address. So it's like, not only are we kind of like showing people like what's the world around the champion like, but like what's the champion like around other characters.
Hey, it's super fascinating. I mean, it's really cool to hear a lot about how the creative side of these card games can be really fleshed out. And it sounds like you guys are looking to do a lot of that with League of Legends World.
Yeah. We're really excited to show people like all the characters and all the like, we're really excited to show people all the new characters we've built and just like different sides of the characters that people already know and love.
Well, if there's anything you want to say to any of the League fans out there or card game fans that are looking forward to Legends of Runeterra, I'm sure they'd love to hear.
I hope you guys really enjoy the game. I hope we're staying true to what you guys love already and giving you more of that world that you maybe haven't even seen before. I hope you guys enjoy it.
Well, thank you so much. Looking forward to playing the game in between Worlds matches, because that's the only way I'm going to be able to play it during this short time. But either way, thanks so much for taking the time to sit down with me.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah. Hey, hope you really enjoyed my coverage of Riot's 10-year anniversary stuff. I'm sure I'll be able to cover so much more of all of that over the next couple of years as it all comes out and comes to fruition. I also wanted to give a shout out to Alienware for sponsoring all of my content this year. You can check them out over at alienware.com/Travis. There's a link in the description below. I'm going to be playing all this new stuff, doing all this new League of Legends Riot Games stuff, all on Alienware hardware, which is going to be awesome. I can't wait to check it all out over there. And again, they make all of our content creation possible with their hardware. So please go check out them at the link in the description below.